Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Denise from the NUS Development Office. Welcome to our NUS Giving webinar series. On behalf of the Development Office, thank you all for joining today's webinar, Harnessing Nature to Combat Climate Change. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items to maximize your enjoyment in today's event. Please double-click on the main screen here to pin the video. That's the slide that says Harnessing Nature to Combat Climate Change, or you can look for the three dots on the top right-hand corner of this slide and select Pin Video. In this 1-hour session, our speakers will be sharing their presentation, followed by a 10 to 15-minute Q&A at the end. You are joining this event on listening mode only, so please mute your microphones. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box as you listen to the webinar, and we will bring it up during the Q&A session at the end. Please also note that we will be recording this webinar. On our panel today, we have Professor Koh Lian Pin, Director of the Center for Nature-Based Climate Solutions at the National University of Singapore. We also have Dr. Adrian Liu, Group Director, Conservation and Wildlife Management, National Parks Board. They will be addressing the long-term impact with regards to climate change and some of the exciting new initiatives they are leading in their respective organizations. Over to you, Prof. Koh.
Thanks, Denise. A very good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today to talk about a topic that is very close to my heart, and also to share some of the work that my colleagues and I have been busy with over the last couple of months. So I am an applied ecologist, and as an applied ecologist, my job really is to address gaps in our scientific knowledge to help inform policies, decisions, and solutions, and ultimately to tackle our most urgent environmental problems. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, we face many urgent environmental problems today. Most of them share something in common, which is, I think, nicely captured by this cartoon. Now, obviously, the person on the tree is us. The tree represents nature, and the branch we sit on represents the essential services that nature provides: food and shelter, clean air and water, the things that keep us alive. In recent years, and especially in recent months, people are beginning to realize that when we overexploit the natural resources and services upon which our economy, our health, and our well-being depend, bad things can happen. Next slide, please. Even though nature is resilient, our insatiable demand and actions can sometimes break nature, or rather just the part of nature that we rely on. And as a consequence, we can fall off the tree. We are arguably living through an example of such a consequence right now, as the world struggles to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. As of this morning, when I checked, the WHO reported over 9 million COVID cases worldwide, resulting in a death toll of almost 500,000 people globally. But to be sure, we don't yet know how this virus first infected humans, but what we are quite certain of is that the many ways by which humans have been destroying nature have created a perfect storm for the transmission of viruses from wildlife to people. Next slide. Some people have observed the positive effects of COVID-19 on the environment. So for example, a decline in greenhouse gas emissions, improvements in air and water quality, and even sightings of wildlife in urban areas. Unfortunately, even if real, these impacts are likely to be only temporary. After the crisis, there is likely to be a rebound effect on fossil fuel use and greenhouse gas emissions, as nations focus on the quickest path to economic recovery. And that brings us to a second and perhaps more insidious example of how we may be metaphorically falling off our tree, and that is climate change. If we take the annual average temperature of the planet over the last 170 years or so, color code them on a scale of blue to red, indicating cooler to warmer temperatures, and visualize that, this is what we would get. It is very clear that the global climate has been on a warming trajectory for quite some time now, and especially during the last 4 decades. If we look at the data for individual countries in our region, we see a very similar trend. It is now uncontroversial and indisputable that the climate is getting increasingly warmer at local, regional, and global levels. So what are the observed impacts of global warming? Examples of impacts on ecological processes include changes at the genetic level, changes in physiology, in morphology, in phenology, population dynamics, in species distributions, in how different species interact with one another, and even in the net primary productivity of entire biomes. These impacts have been observed from the mountains to the lowlands to freshwater ecosystems to marine coastal systems, just about anywhere we care to look. So what are the future impacts of climate change? What can we be expecting? Well, it depends. It depends very much on our success or failure in meeting the target of the Paris Climate Agreement, which is to hold and stabilize global warming to below 2 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels, and also to pursue efforts to limit temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Last year, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, published a special report on how even a 0.5 degrees Celsius difference in the level of global warming can significantly worsen the risks of droughts, of floods, of extreme heat and poverty for hundreds of millions of people. The impacts on nature are just as alarming. For example, if temperatures were to increase by 2 degrees Celsius, then virtually all the world's coral reefs would be lost. So how much time have we got? In that same report, the IPCC also presented 4 pathways. These are roadmaps, essentially, for us to try to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, don't worry about the details of these pathways. There are only 3 key points that I want to highlight. All 4 pathways require us to achieve net zero carbon emissions by around mid-century. Achieving net zero emissions will require fossil emissions to peak by around 2020, around right now, followed by rapid decarbonization, which is shown by the dramatic drawdown of the gray part of the curve. But perhaps more importantly, the IPCC pathways also require actions in the brown part of the curves, which are changes in policies and practices in agriculture, in forestry, and in other land uses. And these are the so-called nature-based climate solutions. In 2017, an international group of scientists modeled the global climate mitigation potential of these so-called nature-based climate solutions across forests, across agricultural lands, grasslands, and wetlands. And they showed that the amount of carbon that nature-based solutions can either store or remove from the atmosphere can provide up to about 1/3 of the total climate mitigation needed through 2030 for a 66% chance of achieving the Paris target. Next slide, please. Next slide. So what exactly are these nature-based climate solutions? in the forestry sector, they include reforestation, avoided deforestation, improvements in natural forest management, improvements in plantation management, and so on. In grasslands and agricultural lands, these solutions include planting trees in croplands, improving our nutrient management, avoiding grassland conversion, and practicing conservation agriculture, for example. In wetlands, the solutions include avoiding further impacts on our peatlands and our coastal ecosystems, and invest in restoring and rehabilitating these coastal ecosystems. Well, nature-based climate solutions are actually not new ideas. Indeed, researchers both in Singapore and across the world have been working on these issues for many years. But what is new is that we have never really considered them as a cohesive set of solutions. Solutions that not only contribute substantially to climate mitigation, but can also deliver co-benefits such as biodiversity conservation, cleaner air and water, and they may also create new economic opportunities. Others are critical of nature-based solutions because of concerns that as a form of carbon offsetting, these solutions may divert attention and efforts away from the need to reduce emissions from fossil fuel use. That is a genuine concern, but it is also important to remember the IPCC pathways I showed you earlier, which tells us that we cannot achieve the Paris target even if we manage to decarbonize by 2050, unless we also figure out the science and practice of implementing these nature-based solutions. Therefore, these nature-based climate solutions are in fact non-substitutable for climate mitigation. There are, however, still considerable research and research implementation gaps that we need to look at, that we need to address, particularly at the regional level. For example, can you go one slide back, please? For example, we still need to understand the potential and limitations of nature-based solutions for addressing climate goals in our region, in Southeast Asia or the Asia Pacific. We need to understand the socio-economic, cultural, political, and policy barriers to the implementation of these solutions that may be unique to our region and may be unique to every region. And we also need to find ways of leveraging technology to help lower the cost of implementing these solutions, and also for discovering new ones. Next slide, please. But I think most importantly, the research and implementation of nature-based solutions is a complex problem that demands an interdisciplinary systems approach because it involves people's lives and livelihoods. And therefore, it requires the consideration of societies' different and often competing priorities. And for example, our need to conserve a forest for carbon storage and sequestration may compete with the farmers' need to convert the forest to grow food for their own sustenance, for their livelihoods, or to support the local economy. Now, given the complex nature of the problem and the urgency of delivering results within the next 10 years, we really need a carefully considered, strategic, and coordinated set of research efforts to address key knowledge gaps and deliver our findings to decision makers to inform policies in socially, culturally, and politically responsible and acceptable ways for Singapore and the region. And that is the primary motivation for this new research center for nature-based climate solutions at NUS. Our center is led by a collaborative team of researchers with multidisciplinary and complementary expertise, and who are committed to a common vision and mission. The vision of the center is to empower public and private sector leaders to respond appropriately and decisively to climate change. And the mission of the center is to address knowledge gaps, to build capacity, and to deliver pragmatic solutions and innovations to realize the center's vision. The center comprises a diverse group of principal investigators or researchers from across different faculties and departments at NUS, including the Faculty of Science, of Arts and Social Sciences, Faculty of Law, and the School of Design and Environment. The center also values the expertise of our colleagues from other institutions in Singapore and has invited them to join the center as affiliate researchers, including our colleagues from NTU, SMU, the Singapore ETH Center, and others. Now, of course, a key mandate of the center is to train future generations of researchers, which is why the center is heavily invested in education through our postdoctoral training programs and our graduate programs. Now, by pooling together researchers from these different places and disciplines, the center has an extraordinary diversity of expertise and experience across many different fields, from conservation science and climate science through environmental law and political ecology to food security and technology. More importantly, given that another mandate of the center is to inform policy and decision making, we are also proactively engaging with government, with corporate and with civil society stakeholders. And through these interactions with our partners, we are also able to better identify the most critical and urgent knowledge gaps. For example, many corporate partners that I've been speaking to are interested in the potential for nature-based solutions to create new economic opportunities while also addressing climate change. Over just the last 2 months, our team went to work on that question and came up with an answer. We find that tropical forests around the world that are currently under threat of deforestation contain within their biomass a huge amount of carbon stock. If we protect these forests, we could potentially generate carbon credits equivalent to about 2.4 gigatons of carbon per year. And that is about half of the European Union's annual carbon emissions. Now, of course, not all forests will be financially viable for carbon finance. In fact, we find that about 75% of these forests will be financially unviable for carbon finance. However, the forests that would be financially viable could generate significant return on investment of greater than $70 billion per year globally, and more than $30 billion per year within the Asia-Pacific region alone. And this is an example of the kind of very practical, very targeted, very policy-driven research that the center will invest in. So partnerships are key to realizing the goals of the center and to tackle climate change. And partnerships, of course, include philanthropies. In fact, philanthropies are the catalysts for sparking and kickstarting high-risk, high-reward, innovative and disruptive new ideas and solutions. Just to give you an example of an initiative that requires such a collective effort, the center and NUS and some of our partners are in the very early stages of developing an idea for a grand challenge competition. The motivation for this competition is our recognition of the urgency and the complexity of the challenges that we currently face as a society, including climate change, food security, water security, our need to decarbonize, our need to safeguard human health and well-being. What we hope to achieve with a competition like this is to spark and incentivize very disruptive, cross-disciplinary, high-risk, high-reward research by awarding significant levels of seed funding to the most exciting ideas. We know that many of these ideas will fail. But that's perfectly okay, because we believe that the few that succeed will ultimately lead to truly game-changing solutions. Now, the center can't do this alone. NUS can't do this alone. The research sector in Singapore can't do this alone. We need partners. We need partners like yourselves. So please do get in touch with me or with my colleagues at NUS if you would like to be part of this solution. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused great suffering. It has caused economic hardships and in general a less livable planet. But I think it has also awakened us to the fact that we are all interconnected and interdependent. And this realization of our interdependence is critical in our fight against climate change. For this new center to thrive and to succeed, we need for you to thrive and succeed in your respective sectors. And for you to thrive and succeed in the long run, you need the center to be successful as well. So I very much look forward to the privilege and the opportunity to continue this discussion with you and to explore ways that we could begin a collaboration. That's the end of my talk. Thank you for your attention. If you have questions, we will address them towards the end of the second talk. I will now hand over to Dr. Adrian Lu from NParks. Incidentally, Adrian was one of the teaching assistants who taught me about Singapore's biodiversity when I was a young undergraduate at NUS, at least 20 years ago, 2 decades ago, when we were both a bit younger and slimmer. I think Adrian will talk to us about NParks' City in Nature initiative as a good example of a nature-based climate solution in the local context. Over to you, Adrian.
Thanks, Prof. Koh. Really, I can only say that that's a real compliment to my teaching abilities that you're now leading this center. And good afternoon, everyone. And I'm really honored to be here as an alum. I graduated with a PhD from NUS and very proud to give this talk with Prof. Koh. And I do remember the honors field trip to Cameron Highlands I had co-organized. Today I want to give the audience an overview of the vision of City in Nature, which shows how our lives can improve with nature-based solutions. So in the next slide, you can see that we are not really starting from scratch. We've had more than 50 years of greening, and it started off with this vision of Garden City. And this progressed to a city and a garden vision that imagined the city-state of Singapore enveloped in a garden. Next slide. Today, we are faced, as Prof. Koh has said, with climate change and increasing urbanization. So what can we do? So the vision of City in Nature, in this next slide, is a new paradigm that builds upon those previous visions to apply nature-based solutions to tackle these key challenges. It will help us achieve resilience in 3 important ways: climate resilience, ecological resilience, and social resilience as well. In this slide, as Prof. Koh said, a healthy ecosystem can bring about a lot of benefits, and I think we probably experience some of these today in Singapore. We have worked very hard to keep our parks open during the circuit breaker period, and now in phase 2, employing safe distance ambassadors to ensure park user safety. And we see that a lot of people find our nature parks and our reserves and gardens a refuge during this time as well, immersed in greenery under the shade of large trees. So what are the strategies? The key strategies in becoming a city in nature are extending our nature park network. Secondly, intensifying nature in our gardens and parks. restoring nature into the urban landscape, the harsh urban landscape, and strengthening connectivity between our green spaces. I will first talk about extending our nature park network. In this next slide, you'll see in the animation, these are our core areas of our nature areas. In the center, you have our central catchment nature reserves. In the south, our southern regions and our islands. And then on the west, our western catchment. And in our northeastern areas, you have Pulau Tekong, Pulau Ubin, Pasir Ris, which are our core areas. And next slide. And this really is, as you can see here, our nature parks in yellow. They envelope our core areas by providing a buffer. And in this case, you can see our upcoming Nature Park Rifle Range Nature Park. It provides a buffer to our really precious Bukit Timah Nature Reserve by being a buffer in a few respects. And one of that is to buffer against the edge effect, the drying effect, and also providing a complementary habitat for fauna. This reduces the impact to our core areas. And it also allows compatible nature-based recreation for people so that they don't crowd into our core area like Bukit Timah Nature Reserve. And also, in these nature park networks, we'll be planting 250,000 native trees in the next 10 years as part of our mitigation plans for climate change. In the next slide, you'll see this beautiful picture. One slide back, please. Yeah, this is overlooking one of our upcoming nature parks, Tit Bongsu. It is like Mandai mudflat and mangrove. And these are very important in feeding and roosting grounds for our migratory shorebirds. But they are also very important nurseries for fish stock in the oceans, which then benefits us in the long term as well if we conserve these areas. Next slide. So this is a picture of Thyrsol Learning Forest in the Botanic Gardens. What we've done to this area is we've enhanced it into a freshwater swamp. Before that, it was really dry. And based on historical maps, we realized that it was actually a swamp. So we enhanced it back to a swamp and educate the public about a key and a very endangered habitat in Singapore. So we'll be intensifying nature in our gardens and parks by planting. Sorry. Hello, is this better, Amanda? Yeah. Okay, sorry, my Google Meet was not muted. Let me carry on. So we'll be planting more naturalistic areas inside our gardens and parks. And this will actually increase the kind of fauna that we'll see, especially bird life in our areas as well. And it provides a sort of connectivity from our core areas to other core areas. And the next slide. By intensifying nature in our gardens, we have also quite a few studies with NUH on the therapeutic effects of gardening for the elderly. This picture shows a potting table for the elderly, and it easily accommodates a wheelchair. And the plants selected are very carefully selected, for example, for their scents or whether they were culturally used to evoke a kind of nostalgia in the elderly as well, and to help them in dementia, to mitigate dementia. Sorry. We also design our playgrounds to be more naturalistic for our children so that they can reconnect with nature. And a great example of naturalizing is the Bishan Ang Mo Kio Park. Besides being able to deal with flash floods, we see otters coming back, and dragonflies. Dragonflies are great. They feed on mosquitoes, and also for people to really appreciate our natural river system. Habitat modification in our parks and gardens also helps with species recovery and also our endangered native species. Surprisingly, Singapore is, for its size, is the stronghold for the straw-headed boo-boo in its natural distribution range throughout Southeast Asia. And as part of our 1 million trees movement, which I invite all of you here to participate in, when the COVID is when things are much better, we can do more tree plantings. Please sign up, and we can enjoy planting trees together in our global fight towards climate change. So everyone can be involved, as Prof. Ko said. In the next slide. So our third strategy is to really restore nature into the urban landscape. And you can see that integration of nature into our built environment also helps with ambient temperature. For buildings like that, you can see a 2 to 3 degrees difference for the ambient temperature, and even more for surface temperature reduction. So our industrial areas are also really urban heat island hotspots. And in the next slide, you can see that in our models, if we do plant it up with forest-like planting, we can mitigate the heat in these areas by about 3 to 6 degrees Celsius. This is an image of Jurong Island. So we plan to plant up Jurong Island with about 100,000 trees. And in other industrial estates also. And you can see that there's a move towards our planting palette towards a more naturalistic streetscape planting. We also plan to strengthen connectivity between our green spaces. And in the next slide, you can see that one of our nature ways. Next slide, please. Yeah. Next slide. You can see that this will be planted in a very lush way in the tiered structure, and this really encourages animals like birds to use it as a connector. Yeah. Next slide. And so everyone has a role to play. So we are even inviting our citizens to be involved in the park planning as well. Next slide. So we have over 50 parks that are going to undergo rejuvenation. And so we are inviting people to even come into the creation of the design and the construction and the landscaping, as well as the programming of in these parks. And this is our 1 million trees campaign, and it will be led by the community. You'll hear more about it as we go along. And of course, this we are hoping that City in Nature not only helps us mitigate climate change, it will lead to a more gracious and caring society. Yeah. And that's the end of my slides. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Ko and Dr. Lu, for your insightful sharing. Really enjoyed that. And Dr. Lu, just to let you know, my development office actually did a project where we planted trees on campus. So we did our part, and we recycled books as well, secondhand books.
Okay, excellent.
For our participants, we are now starting the Q&A session. And so if you have any questions for our panel speakers, please type them into the chat box. So over to you, Prof. Ko and Dr. Lu.
Yeah, thanks, Denise. And thanks, Adrian, for the very interesting talk about the City in Nature program in Singapore. It actually got me, so while we wait for the questions to come in, I actually do have a few questions of my own for you. So I remember one of the slides you showed where, actually you showed 2 slides, one showing the before and then one showing the after. Before the re-landscaping, and then after the landscape or the natural elements are introduced to the landscape, and it's a huge difference, and it's a very it made a very big impression on me. And so in general, how do you see the role of art, in or visualizations in helping people sort of visualize the the future and what the future could look like, and perhaps to try to increase buy-in and support for that kind of change.
Yeah, so thanks, Proco. These planting pallets and these designs, right, are really amazing. It helps us then to actually go on to plant. So it's not just imaginary. If you go on to our streetscape right now, you will notice the changes that are happening. The multi-tiered planting. If you go to a nature way like Kiam Hock Road, you will begin to see really multi-tiered layers of planting. And through modeling, right, you can also, and the models are based on leaf area indices, and evapotranspiration data. So this also helps us to also know that by doing this, right, you are able then to achieve something. So it's something that's achievable. So, and I noticed there's another question inside the chat group by Desmond, who asked about, as we plan for more connectivity in forest-tiered structure, how do we then mitigate against wildlife conflicts? I think that's an excellent question, and also a challenge for us also. We do see otters now running around, and sometimes wild boars coming out. So, and I think one of the things is education. And besides education, also we have very strong laws now with the Wildlife Act, not for people not to feed feed any animals. A lot of times, wild boars come out and approach people because there are feeders of wild boars, and if you stop feeding them, the wild boars will search for humans for food. That's one reason. I'm not saying that it's only the reason. And for otters also, they're coming out. The population is growing. It is reaching a kind of capacity already. But we have multiple organizations coming together in our otter working group. NUS is one of them. And together, right, we engage the public and educate the public about what's actually driving these otters to search for these places. And incidentally, right, it's only one family of otters that's being nomadic right now that is actually running all over, and it's really amplified by social media. So we really go on the media. Siva from NUS also addressed this on the media and told many people. As a master educator, he was telling people like, really we have to understand the fundamentals and really understand deeply about these issues, as well. Yeah.
Maybe I can take a question that was addressed to me. So the question is about why are 75% of the tropical forests financially unviable for carbon finance? So this is quite a technical and specific question, but it actually it's actually a good lead into a bigger point I can make later. But just on this question, for all these nature-based solutions or whatever solutions we want to implement, there are always trade-offs, right? There are costs and there are payoffs. And in this case, we found that at the current carbon price of about the average of about $5 to $6 per ton of carbon, and given that some forests may contain lower carbon stocks than others, so there is variation in the amount of carbon that the forests around the world contain. We find that about 75% of them do not contain enough carbon, or the carbon stock per hectare is not high enough to offset the cost of implementing a carbon finance project. And the cost of carbon finance projects would include things like going down to the ground, spending long periods of time interacting with the local communities, getting their consent, getting their buy-in, and then doing all the field surveys and so on. And then after the project is established, you also need to regularly go back in, to monitor the progress of the project, to make sure that the carbon stocks are still there, and so on and so forth. So there is actually quite a huge amount of cost associated with carbon finance project. So of course, if the carbon prices increase in the future to $10, $20 per ton, then the numbers would change. Then perhaps we would be able to protect more of the tropical forests through carbon finance. Yeah, so the bigger point here is that all these solutions would have their associated costs. And actually, maybe I could also ask Adrian about this as well, because I'm also very interested in many of the initiatives that was launched as part of the City for Nature program in Singapore. How does NParks deal with the costs of these solutions? And in cases where partners were involved, were partners willing to help with supporting the costs?
Yeah, so Prof. Koh, yeah. So we have very generous donors as well in our Garden City Fund, and that also helps to offset some of the costs, especially in the planting of our trees. They do cost, and another way what we are doing right now, interestingly, is harvesting a lot of the seeds, the germplasm that fall on the forest floor. And we know that some of these will either be on trails, or they won't be successful in growing up to tall trees in the forest or on the trails. So we do collect them, and we have a native plant center, and a lot of that is now being planted in our satellite nurseries. And some of these satellite nurseries are also schools. And that helps a lot, because they get to have a very educational program about our native plants, and they do get their hands dirty, and they can plant some of these plants in their schools, and they also can contribute these plants back to us. And I think there was a question on how City in Nature can promote mental resilience. Right now, you know that we are also distributing seeds. I don't know whether some of you have registered for it, but it's a very popular program, and we've got a lot of requests actually for these seeds. And part of that was because we also wanted people to be able to do something, and to be able to plant especially their own kind of food vegetables, and to do something about the situation, because everybody was scared about food supply in Singapore as well. During the circuit breaker, right, there was a lot of shutdowns in our neighboring countries as well. But we managed that. But that provided some, that was really well received in terms of that. For a while, we also were worried about tree supplies coming from different countries for our plantings. But luckily, we have our native plant center, and in our satellite nurseries also, we do have stock of our own. We have tree banks, and we have stock of these native plants as well. So actually, the forest that we have can provide a source of these trees as well. It's a matter of just really going out there to do that. Yeah. And when we calculated planting 1 million trees, because we've been planting almost like 70,000 trees every year, and adding to that, right, over the next 10 years, right, really the delta isn't very much. Yeah.
Great. So maybe I'll take another question. So there's a question for me about how or what the center hopes to achieve in the next 12 months, and how can philanthropists come in and support the center. Yeah, I think it is not just about how the philanthropists can help support the center, but it's also how the center can help the philanthropists achieve what they want to achieve, right? So it's a two-way street. We can be mutually helpful to each other, to one another. From the center's perspective, I think what we are most interested in is to have support in initiatives and activities that are not normally supported by more traditional mechanisms, research grants or other such things. And an example of such an initiative is the one I shared during my talk, about the Grand Challenge. Many other, maybe just to elaborate a little bit more on the Grand Challenge idea. These ideas are not unique, of course. I'm not the first one to think of these ideas. For example, MIT has a similar Grand Challenge competition called MIT Solve. Some private organizations have also set up a similar competition. For example, the Rolex Foundation has set up Rolex awards, and they have been very successful in discovering and supporting very disruptive and very creative solutions. And like I said, I think it's out of the 100 solutions that are supported, even if 1 or 2 or 5 of them, a handful of them, eventually become successful, these usually are the ones that could become game changers. And that's what we really want to try to support. Because the challenges that we face these days are becoming more and more complex. No one single discipline can address them by themselves. So the old practice or idea of someone being able to conduct research in his or her own silo without working with others no longer applies. That's antiquated. It's antiquated long ago. And so what we need now is this cross-disciplinary work, a truly cross-disciplinary work, pulling people together from different universities, departments, and faculties, and working to come up with very creative solutions. And these solutions are also not they come not just from the very established or senior researchers. In fact, I think the more junior researchers, the students, are the ones who usually come up with more creative solutions than some of us, the older ones, simply because they can think more out of the box and more creatively. So these kinds of competition would be targeting those kinds of young minds of researchers, so that we can come up with really impactful research and solutions. Yeah, so maybe I'll stop there.
Yeah.
Do you want to take another question, Adrian?
Yeah, before I take that question, I think I have one question for you, Lian Pin. Where do you see Singapore, right, in this global effort to mitigate climate change? Seeing that we are really just a very small island on this planet. And I'm really interested. You gave a very interesting talk, and I think the questions here are very interesting. I would like to answer all of them. If there's time, I might give a written reply. But what's your thought on this?
Yeah, I don't see Singapore's physical size as any kind of constraint or limitation to what we can achieve as a nation. I think we have some of the best universities in the world. We certainly have some of the best research infrastructure and the top talents in research that we have managed to cultivate and also to attract to Singapore to join us. So that combined with the fact that there are still lots of research questions and research gaps that we need to address, not just on nature-based solutions, but also on human-engineered solutions, on the need to decarbonize, on food security, on water security, and a host of other issues that they are all interrelated in one way or another. There's no lack of research to be done. I think we can be a research hub and a solutions hub for addressing climate change impacts in the region, if not the world. And also, Singapore and NUS has such a close relationship with our neighbors, with ASEAN countries, and also with the wider Asia Pacific countries. I think we have a very intimate knowledge of the local context, not just the biophysical context, the environmental context, but also the the cultural context, the geopolitical context. We know what's happening here, and we have known what's happening here for a long time. And so I think we are well positioned to take on this responsibility to help get our neighbors on board to collectively address this challenge.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And likewise, in our city nature vision and all the greenery in Singapore basically has drawn a lot of attention regionally and globally. We do get a lot of visitors coming in from overseas governments, NGOs, really asking about what was our success story, and it really is really very historical. It goes back a long way, but they are quite amazed that a small country like that can be quite an example, and cities are becoming very important. So I think as a city state, I think we have really very lush greenery. We can improve on that in many ways as well, and we continue to do so. But like what you say, we are like a microcosm to the global context. Yeah, I'd like to take a question that was addressed to me about the marine side of things. Yeah, we do have a National Biodiversity Center, and they do have a coral nursery. So that's very interesting. Coral also actually sequester carbon, and we do also look at species recovery of corals and also of seahorses. So we do have a very big species recovery program. We also have a turtle hatchery, and we do have a turtle working group that looks at where these turtles are nesting, and sometimes we rescue turtles, and also we rescue some of the eggs, and then we release them, especially if they are late, if in really in really sites where they're very busy. So it's a very complicated protocol that they have developed. But if you'd like to know more, you can write in as well to learn about our species recovery program. And you can actually be a part of that as well.
Yeah, maybe I can take a quick question. There's a question about how Singapore has been increasing our greenery in our urban areas. NParks and URA have different initiatives on that. And the question is about whether there would be any potential to, or whether there would be any carbon sequestration potential for this greenery that we could potentially use to offset carbon emissions. So I think, well, given that Singapore is always limited by the amount of land that we could use that is available for other users other than what's already been allocated for. I think the direct mitigation potential of this greenery may be limited in our context, in the Singapore context. But if we are, but Singapore can be used as a test bed for coming up with ways to maximize this sequestration potential. Not just sequestration, but also maintaining or protecting the carbon stocks of many of our so-called novel ecosystems, our parks, our previous rubber plantations or durian plantations and so on. So we actually have a lot of these fragments around Singapore. So if we can understand how much these are contributing to climate mitigation, even if they are small in the local context, these approaches of measuring and monitoring these potentials could be potentially upscaled in different cities, other cities in the region and the world. And maybe collectively, if we look across all cities, all major cities with greenery, then the collective potential for protecting these carbon stocks and for carbon sequestration may indeed be quite high. That's actually a very interesting research question that I haven't actually seen anyone tackle. Yeah. Anything to add? Anything to add?
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to add that you know, the picture I saw of the showed of the plants draping a building. That actually can reduce the ambient heat by maybe about 2 or 3 degrees Celsius. But the surface temperature can be reduced by quite a significant amount. And this might reduce the need um, for fossil fuel burning, for energy, the use of energy consumption in cooling the entire building down. So this indirectly, reduces the carbon emission that we really need to have in a building. So that's one way of looking at it. I think there are some studies to look at rooftop gardens as well. Yeah. But interestingly, these rooftop gardens and this greenery also help to promote connectivity in our forests to different parts of Singapore. Yeah.
Right. So actually, I have another question for you, Adrian.
Yeah.
So just looking at the City in Nature program from an ecological perspective, were there any challenges in terms of, for example, introducing or reintroducing more of the native species versus the maybe easier to manage and more resilient non-native species of trees?
Well, that's a great question. Interestingly, right, that whole idea, that whole concept was very well received by people. That we are planting our native plants. The only thing that I would lament is that people don't really know much about our native plant species. So it's really up to us to also educate people. We really have tropical hardwood species, like our dipterocarps, that on average actually would sequester more carbon in its lifetime than a very fast-growing, temperate tree. So these dipterocarps, these tropical hardwoods, right? They do grow and they do pack their wood very closely, and so they actually sequester quite a lot of carbon. And not only that, I think we are also planting mangrove species in our mangroves, and mangroves are known to sequester. This is the work coming from Dan Fries from NUS. The mangroves do sequester about 3 times more carbon than a normal forest, a terrestrial forest. So mangroves are really a very good ecosystem for carbon sequestration in the long term. And amongst other things, mangroves are also nurseries for our fish stocks, and they also, help in coastal erosion. Yeah. So I think there's also a question about natural landscapes the trees being cut down, and are we taking care of our endemic species? I can tell you that we do, like I mentioned, we do have a species recovery program, but that's only targeted at the species. But on a more ecosystems level, we have habitat enhancement, and this takes care of a whole suite of ecologically linked trophic levels of species that can be conserved as a whole in a habitat.
Yeah, I'm just cognizant of the time, and I think maybe it's time to hand this back to Denise to wrap up.
Thank you, Prof. Koh and Dr. Liu, for your insightful sharing. You've certainly given us a lot of food for thought. To our audience, I hope you enjoyed the session today. If you have questions that we didn't get to address, please contact us at the address shown on the screen. We will send you all the relevant links after the event, including a link to the webinar recording, which will be active for 3 days only. Your feedback is also important to us, so please scan the QR code here shown on the screen for our feedback survey. We will also send you an email link to the survey. Thank you so much for participating in today's webinar. We hope to see you again next time.